Well, anyway, I think we should probably roll the theme tune now. We can't skip that, can we, Steph?
No, we can't.
No.
Hello there, this is Ross Noble here, and I'm on this show right now.
Hi, it's Rochelle Q.
Hi, I'm Astro. And I'm Alex from UB40. I'm Nick Ewan.
Thursday breakfast on Source FM with Benjamin Makin.
Yeah, well, a very, very, very good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us today on your Thursday morning Source FM breakfast show. This show, as always, is brought to you by the University of Exeter. Now, this is part 2 of a highlight special. Last week we had the fantastic Professor Sasha Dool and Professor Dave Hoskin chatting about Jurassic Park science, sci-fi science, great stuff. And we also had a fantastic call-in, a live call-in from Cameron Cahoon, who is a senior analyst, an ex-senior analyst at GCHQ, chatting about that new series that we're talking about, Deep State, which is, in fact, on again tonight, if you want to catch that. 9 o'clock on Fox, Deep State, starring Mark Strong, the devilishly handsome Mark Strong. Coming up today, then, now we've got a few other interviews I'm really keen to play again. As I said, this is a part 2 of the highlight special. This is our 1-year anniversary here on Source FM, here on your Thursday morning breakfast slot. So, we have a few, and now there's actually too many to play, and this is unfair. You know, I can't choose a favourite. That's totally out of order, and there's just too many to choose from anyway. So, here's the thing, right? I thought, well, what about if you give me a hand? So if you have an idea of what you want to hear, I'm going to give you a few options in a second, and we'll get kicked off with something. I'm going to give you a few options, and if you find any of these ideas particularly interesting, just give me a text. You can message me, actually, on Facebook if you want. You can email me, anything you want. Just go on the Source FM website, go on the Thursday morning breakfast show page, and you'll find all my contact details there. Otherwise, you can actually just text me directly on 07860 670 917. That's 07860 670 917. Now, let me tell you some of the options that we could play for you today, okay? So, we have, now this is, we had, as I just said, we had the profs last time chatting about, I asked them basically whether Jurassic Park were technically, or I suppose, possible given an unlimited budget. You know, is it theoretically possible? So, you can listen back to that if you like. It's on the catch-up now, that show is. But I've actually got a bit of a follow-up to that, actually. And this is actually a while ago now. This fantastic researcher visited us at the University of Exeter down here in Cornwall. And he's called Professor Michael Sweet. He's from Derby, University of Derby. And he's written actually this book with a few other scientists called An Introduction to Molecular Ecology. And it's kind of aimed at undergraduate level science and perhaps a bit he's written it basically so it's quite accessible, which is fantastic. So, if you're a student as well, then this might interest you. Or indeed, if you don't have any formal science background, that doesn't matter. Like, you might actually find this quite interesting. And he actually he was chatting to us a little bit about his work and this book, and he touches on a lot of basically science that sounds really, really, really sci-fi, that he actually argues is, we can actually achieve a lot of the science now. And this is things like de-extinction. So this is why I'm mentioning this bit. This interview, because of course this is what Sasha and Dave were chatting about last time, because I asked them whether basically, and de-extinction here is literally meaning exactly what that sounds like. It's bringing back extinct organisms back from the dead almost, using particular technologies. And this is basically one of the things he's interested in, and one of the things that he writes about in this book with these other scientists, a de-extinction, and basically he reaches a similar conclusion to what Sasha and Dave were talking about. And this is, if you have this DNA, Sasha and Dave's point was basically, it is theoretically possible, but you need the DNA, of course. You need the DNA of that organism to be out. Those are the instructions, right? Of course you're going to need those if you want to bring back an organism that's extinct. If you can have a decent DNA sample, you can probably do it. That was basically their argument, and this is basically what he was arguing as well. So woolly mammoths, for instance, and Sasha actually mentioned mammoths before as a good example. Basically DNA contained in permafrost, and it's resist degradation. So actually, for instance, Michael actually argues straight up, we definitely could resurrect a woolly mammoth, and things like that. Amazing interview, and he touches on alien life as well, which is something that Sasha and Dave have also talked about in the past. He also touches on, if any of these terms do interest you, by the way, do text, because there's a couple of interviews from Michael, so I could play one of these or both of them if you want to hear all of this. And of course, all of the interviews are available on Catch Up as well. I'll tell you how you can listen to those a bit later. But he also touches on this technology called eDNA, environmental DNA. So again, it's kind of in a kind of DNA arena, if you like, and this is amazing. And we're talking about the possibility of having these scanners. And this literally sounds like, I mean, I was playing this game called Mass Effect. Steph's not looking very pleased at me now because I'm talking about video games, sounding a bit, not to your taste probably, stuff. But there's this reason I'm saying this because there's this technology in this scanner basically, and the game revolves around the use of this scanner, as I'm sure a lot of sci-fi stuff does, which basically, the user has the scanner and it tells you basically everything you need to know about the world around you. You point at a plant, for instance, it tells you what plants there, what other organisms are there. And he's basically arguing that we almost do have that technology. Of course, not it's a lot faster, obviously, in these in films and games and things, but he's actually arguing that we do basically have the technology underpinning this sort of eDNA scanner that could tell you anything you needed to know about the world around you. It could tell you what organisms were present, could even tell you what diseases were present, what viruses, what bacteria were present. Incredible. And this all stems basically from his kind of long-standing interest in symbioses, which is another interesting term, actually, and this is actually my own area of work. I won't talk about that, don't worry, won't bore you. Fascinating guy. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but that's one option for you today, and I think we might start. Perhaps we'll start with some of that, and then if you're interested, let me know. We can carry on the same theme. But that's Professor Michael Sweet from Derby. We also have, as I said before, every single guest we have on the show is fantastic, and I love every single one of them. Without sounding too strange. Anyway, this is Dr. Elizabeth Murchison. Elizabeth's fantastic. She's done a TED Talk. TED Talks are great if you've never come across those. They're really, really nice talks. You can find them all online, actually, TED Talks. They get a lot of basically different experts, different scientists to talk about various topics. But Elizabeth's done one of these, and she belongs to the Transmissible Cancer Group at Cambridge. Transmissible cancer is a bit of a weird topic, isn't it? It's one of those things which you think, oh, hang on, transmissible in cancer. That's not something which you often associate with cancers. Indeed, there are actually examples of transmissible cancer in humans. There are examples. It is rare, though. It isn't it isn't particularly concerning for us, the transmission aspect of cancer for us in humans, although there are things like viruses. Elizabeth can go into this a bit more if you're interested in this kind of thing. There are things like viruses which can be transferred between humans, which then may increase the chances of getting cancer. This is kind of commonplace. But, what we're talking about here is the actual cancer itself almost becomes this transmissible organism, and it almost becomes its own kind of, almost like its own species. It's a bit of a strange idea, really. This cancer can originate in one individual and pass on to other individuals. But that's fascinating. She basically looks at this, particularly in the area of Tasmanian devils, because I don't know if you know about this, but Tasmanian devils are actually subject to a big crisis at the moment because of this transmissible cancer. So for whatever reason, Elizabeth will go into this a bit more. In Tasmanian devils, cancer has become transmissible, and it's basically decimating the population. And actually, the predictions look, really quite not very good actually for the Tasmanian devil. And I promise I will stop talking in a minute. I'll get some stuff on. Well, maybe bit heavy already, isn't it, Steph? Maybe we should play some music. What do you think?
Let's play some music.
Yeah. Well, we will. Don't worry. We also have Dr. Lewis Halsey for the University of Roehampton. He's chatting about animal movement, and in particular, and this is pretty cool, he did this experiment basically where he used human parkour athletes to basically try and replicate the movement of chimps in a lab environment. Pretty cool, isn't it? Pretty cool. He also talks a little bit about why you don't see any perfect organisms in nature. Has that ever struck you as weird? Why isn't there just one organism, for instance? You're told, for instance, that, natural selection, obviously Darwinian natural selection, always selects, if you like, for the best traits, the best organisms, the fittest survive, that whole idea. So if you take that to the extreme, you could ask, okay, well, why isn't there one single organism which is just good at everything? And basically, we go into why that is, why you don't see that. Actually, that even has a term. Darwin gave that imaginary organism a term. He called it, it was kind of given this term, a Darwinian demon, because it was kind of this, almost like this kind of angelic force that was just good at everything. And this was kind of this whole idea about this part of this interview, really. Why don't we see any perfect organisms? Lewis has got some great answers for that. But anyway, let's kick off then. And as I said, any of this takes your interest, if you want us to focus on anything out of there, because we won't have time to get this all in this morning, then please do text me. Right, well, let's get kicked off then, shall we? Okay, first up, I am going to start with a bit of Professor Michael Sweet. Let's get started on this sci-fi technology idea. And then after this, I think we will take a short break from science into the area of showbiz with a message from Amanda Holden. So first of all, let's get this fantastic researcher on, Professor Michael Sweet from the University of Derby. Now, you can follow Michael if you're interested in this kind of thing. You can follow him on Twitter at Disease Matters. Okay, that's his Twitter handle. So feel free to follow him on there. Otherwise, please just enjoy this section and do join us in the studio straight after this.
We work on this thing called environmental DNA, and it's a relatively new concept. It's a molecular tool where you can go to a lake or a river or even in the sea in some instances, and you can just take a water sample and you can actually identify what species are present. So you can either do a targeted approach, so it's all molecular tools. You can either design the primers specific to target a particular shark species, or in the freshwater systems we work principally in the UK. We're looking into crayfish, for example. So white-clawed crayfish is our native species, so we can develop a primer to target that. Or we might want to be more interested in the invasive species. So the red-clawed, it's a signal crayfish from America, which is widespread and invading and causes mass problems for our native species, out-competing, and also brings a disease with it as well called crayfish plague. We might want to look for that for a management strategy. So we can have these different targeted programs. We take our water sample, you run it through a quantitative PCR machine called qPCR, and you can look at the presence-absence very easily, but then with a bit of validation, we're actually trying to build up a quantifiable method to look at relative abundance in particular areas. The advantage of this tool is that it's once the actual tool is designed, the methods are validated, which takes a lot of work to prep that, and my PhD students do that in the labs on a regular basis. It then becomes a relatively cheap tool for ecological consultants, land developers, even the government environmental agency, for example, are using these tools to assess waterways, and also not only for development side of things, but also for a conservation step as well. So you can really look into that sort of instances. It complements current traditional survey methods. It will never supersede that. And some people do worry about that. They think that these new tools will put people out of jobs and things like that, and it will never do that. It's just an additional tool in the belt of an ecologist or a manager to go out and actually find a sample and be slightly more reliable, or in certain instances when the organism is rare and not picked up by physical survey methods, you can pick it up in lower levels using this tool, so it's more sensitive.
What's it picking up? Is the DNA produced from fecal matter, or is it just cells that have fallen off organisms that are living there? How do you scoop some water and find out what's living in it?
Yeah, so it very much varies per species. So if we stick with the crayfish story, then it's when they molt, you get a large amount of DNA released, obviously during reproduction, so gametes in the water, from either the sperm or the eggs, or even the juveniles themselves you can detect. Any type of mucus shedding as well. We mentioned mucus previously about it being a very important function of many organisms, and it is prevalent in pretty much everything from the surface of skin to even crustaceans and things like that. So this DNA is continually being released into the environment. Obviously, on top of that, you've got when an organism dies as well. That's probably not as useful because we want to know living levels of these organisms, but you've got that life cycle as a whole. But that's why it's really important to validate your techniques. So we spend a lot of time before we actually release a product, so to speak, to make sure that we can test and see where the limitations are, because no method is 100% perfect. And as long as that's highlighted, there's a few people who have their doubts about eDNA, and that's because some people rush the release of the paper or the product, and it's not tested to its strengths and weaknesses. So it's very important to look at seasonality. Is there a point when you can't detect it, even though you know there's a population in there? Is there an area, especially if you're looking at quantifiable counts, if they're releasing all their sperm and eggs then obviously you're going to get a high spike. But that's still going to have to be comparable to when they're not releasing, so when you're just getting that background level of DNA as well. But you can also take this tool to stop it from just being targeted. You can actually use a metagenomic approach, which is looking at a whole taxon, for example. So you can look at all invertebrates in a stream, or all fish species in a stream. And that's just designing slightly different primers, but it gives you a more general look, so you get these two different options. But again, you've still got that same sort of issues associated with maybe not detecting one or two species because of the way they live, if they burrow into the sediments under the water and things like that. And that brings us to the other importance is when you're actually sampling, you've got to be really careful, because if in the water, if it's flowing water, the more common DNA will only survive for a few days detectable if that organism isn't there. So if it's passed through or it's moved out, and you need to be able to test this and check regularly in tank experiments and in the field. But in the sediment, if the DNA is settled into the sediment, still from either a carapace of a crustacean or something, or a dead organism, it can actually remain in there for years, and potentially if you disturb that sediment, it could give you a false reading. So if you walked into your river to get this water sample with your wellies and disturbed all the sediment, took your sample, it would give you a positive test, but that could be false positive because it could have been there last year instead of this year. So there's a real importance for people who are using this tool to actually understand how to utilize it properly and how to actually collect their samples, and then interpret the results that we can provide for them.
So used with care, as you're saying, this technology sounds absolutely incredible. This is kind of getting closer to these kind of sci-fi scans, right, where you can just pick up the DNA in the environment and know what's there. This is essentially what it is, right?
Yeah, well, it goes even further. So there's some concepts, and this is not our particular research group, but there's the idea which links the sort of two research ideas we work on, the sort of microbiome side of things, and this eDNA concept. And there's the idea that all humans actually have a cloud of microbes associated with them. So not only do you have your microbe inside you and on your surface, on your skin, but you each have an individual cloud surrounding you.
I have no idea about that. That's fantastic.
And there's some people who are saying that if you use this eDNA concept, so we use environmental DNA in the water, it's where it's really nice, but there's nothing stopping you looking at eDNA in the air. If you just use a different sample method, a filter, to collect whatever you're looking for, and you can potentially get a whole community of the bacteria of your bacterial cloud, potentially. This is a little bit more sci-fi.
Yes.
But then I could come in here and I could say that you had actually been in this room yesterday or the day before or something like that. So this potentially has huge implications for things like forensic science. If you're trying to link someone to a murder or something like that, and there's no other normal forensic evidence, so blood, tissue, saliva, those sort of things, then potentially this cloud method could actually work. And there is a scientific paper out there. I can't remember exactly which one or what the name was, but I remember reading it the other day.
So we do have auras, bacterial auras.
Exactly, yeah, it's very interesting. I think we may be a little bit off that properly for the time being, but the concepts are there, people are talking about it, and in theory we can test it, so it's not too far off if it's not out there already.
That's probably the coolest thing I think I've ever learned. Yeah, that's awesome,
exciting things. Watch this space, really. So,
yeah.
We're developing this eDNA for lots of different freshwater species, and we're working with the Environmental Agency, DEFRA, CFAS, government policy, particularly with the aspect of Brexit coming on, of how environmental policy is shifting and changing. So that's our focus. We're more interested in trying to find easy ways to monitor our native populations, but also these invasive species which are causing mass problems. So there's another couple of examples of quite interesting deadly organisms called killer and demon shrimps. So they're really, really small little beasts, and they seem to eat all our native shrimp. For you and I, you probably wouldn't ever notice this or feel any impact, but for the freshwater environment as a whole, it can be a major game changer. And mapping and monitoring these organisms, seeing where they're spread, seeing how they're spread, could be an important management tool used by both government and universities and conservation agencies to try and curb either the continued introduction of these species and or new species which are always going to be coming in.
I think I'm going to have nightmares about killer and demon shrimps now.
I'm not sure if they completely live up to the name. They're
No.
just taking out other shrimp.
They literally are about a centimetre in size, but if you were a shrimp, you would be a little bit worried, I think.
Absolutely. You
So they're probably named by other shrimp.
Michael, before we wrap up, actually, I hear congratulations on all because you've recently put a book out, right?
Yeah, so we've got a book called Introduction to Molecular Ecology. It's actually the third edition of this book, and I've only jumped on for the third edition now, and it's bringing in some of these new concepts. So environmental DNA features into that, so you can people can read that and explore that. It's available online, all good bookshops, I imagine, and all they say on those sort of things.
Yeah.
And it's designed in a way so that it is very user-friendly and can be picked up by anybody, even if you haven't got a biological background. But it's mainly ideated for focusing on university undergrads in that particular field.
That was Professor Michael Sweet. More from him a bit later, if you'd like to hear a bit more about his kind of sci-fi technology ideas there. Absolutely fantastic. And don't forget, he has got that book, Introduction to Molecular Ecology, if you're interested. Right, okay, we're going to take a quick break now, Steph, because I'm going to remind you of a great time. One of my personal... Because, of course, this is a part 2 of the highlight show, as we said, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
So I thought... well, I would like to remind you of one of my personal highlights.
Okay.
And this was when Matt Edmondson told me that when he runs everything. He runs the entire media world, because Matt Edmondson's quite a well-known chap, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
You know, pretty well-known chap. Anyway, he said that when he owns it all, this were his words, when he owns it all, I can get a job in his castle.
Oh, wow.
How good's that?
That is really good.
So I just thought I'd remind the listeners about that, just so you know I'm not making this up. So Matt Emerson is going to have a castle, and I'm going to live in it, being some kind of servant, I assume. That's fine. I get to be in the castle. That's fine. Here it is. Here's that little clip.
Hey Ben, how you doing?
Hello there. Well, what a pleasure to be speaking to you, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm really well, and to you. Thanks so much for having me on, Ben.
No. Well, thank you to you. Thank you for your time. I'll just, Matt, if I could just ask you just to very briefly, just say who you are, so our listeners are going to be pretty excited when they hear that it's you, actually.
Yeah, hello, I'm Matt Edmondson. I'm sometimes on the telly and the radio.
Yeah, only sometimes, obviously. The media king, I think, should be your title, actually. It's the king of media.
I'm not quite there yet, but one day, Ben, one day, I shall rule it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, luckily I'll know the king, so hopefully we'll get quite a good job under the king's rule, so that'll be good.
Absolutely, you can come to the Media Palace anytime you want.
Well, thank you. Very kind. Well, I mean, let's get on. There we go. So I can go to his... I realise I glorified that a bit. I won't actually have a job, but I can go to the Media Palace.
You go to the Media Palace.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll settle for that. Okay, right. I've just got another absolutely cracking request sent through, actually, which is going to come up next. So, Steph, I'm going to leave this up to you, actually. You're going to make a decision now. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
A lot's riding on this. I hope you're ready. You prepared?
I'm prepared.
Right, okay. Now, the decision is this. So, before we play this fabulous request, I'm either keen to play... Right. I think either Elizabeth Murchison from Cambridge, and I think this would go well, actually, because I'm going to have to own up. This next request is from my father. And he went to Cambridge, so I think this would suit well, actually. Yes. I think before his request is played, let's do that. I'm going to play Elizabeth Murchison. She's from Cambridge. She belongs to the Transmissible Cancer Group. She works on Tasmanian devils. She's an absolutely brilliant speaker. She's done a TED talk before, and she visited campus actually a while ago, and I caught her while she was here over a coffee. I disturbed her coffee. She probably wasn't very happy about that, but she was very polite. She didn't tell me to get lost or anything like that. She said, "Yeah, I can chat." Probably through gritted teeth a bit, but anyway, she's a fantastic researcher. Let's get her on, shall we? So she's talking, as I said, about Tasmanian devils and this transmissible cancer, which is just ravaging the population at the moment. Let's get it on. It's great. Okay, and do join me afterwards because that request is coming up. A very warm welcome to the show. Thank you very much for agreeing to appear on it. It's a real pleasure to have you here. So we've been talking today, just attended your seminar, actually very interesting talk about transmissible cancer. Now, transmissible and cancer, kind of two words you don't often hear together because we don't traditionally think of cancer as being this kind of transmissible disease, do we?
Yeah, so cancer, of course, occurs when a cell in our body goes wrong and gets some mutations that cause it to grow into a tumour, so kind of grow in an uncontrolled fashion. So cancer cells can grow in the body and sometimes they spread to different parts of the body, but normally if the host dies, then the cancer dies too. Transmissible cancers are an exception to that. They're cases where cancer cells actually get out of the original host and actually get into another host, allowing the continued survival of the cancer after the death of the original individual that first gave rise to the cancer. So this is a very unusual process in nature. We only know of a very small handful of cases like this, but one of them is the Tasmanian devil, which seems to be particularly vulnerable to this disease. It's important to note as well that when we hear the word transmissible and perhaps transmissible cancer, perhaps what springs to many people's minds is viruses, because there are known connections between viruses and cancer. There are some viruses which are known to increase risk of cancer.
I think cervical cancer is an example of that in humans, isn't it?
Exactly. So human papillomavirus increases the risk of someone developing cervical cancer. The transmissible cancers I'm talking about in the Tasmanian devil, they're not like that. They're different. There's no virus involved in the transmission event, but rather it's actually cancer cells themselves becoming infectious agents.
Yeah, so you put it really nicely in talk, actually. So you said, because a lot of the time cancer is essentially what you might call a kind of evolutionary dead end, because it just dies with the host, essentially. But in this case, that's not true, because it actually lives on by transmitting itself to a new host, which is kind of what allows it to become this. It's almost like this kind of whole new parasitic organism, I guess. It's kind of a weird thing.
Yeah, well, actually, you can think of every cancer as being an incipient parasite, I suppose, because a cancer is, despite the fact that it's derived from its host's cells, it's a process of selfish evolution, and it's a parasite in its host. So transmissible cancers are cancers which have gone to the next step and have actually transmitted to another host. And in humans, there are actually a small handful of cases where we know of cancers which are transmitted from one person to another, but no examples where they've spread beyond that into the population, like has happened in the Tasmanian devils.
Because it sounds like it's actually quite a very bad state at the moment, isn't it? In the case of the Tasmanian devils, you're saying that essentially this could be the kind of only species on Earth to actually be threatened with extinction from a cancer, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very unusual type of threat. So, of course, many species are at risk, are endangered due to a variety of problems, including diseases, but the Tasmanian devil just has such an unusual type of disease that's threatening them. You
mentioned in your talk that there was a couple of drugs which you were using more, I think, to, correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of using more to try and understand what kind of processes are involved in the particular cancer in the Tasmanian devils. And actually one of the questions that was put to you was, could those drugs potentially be used, as a cure, as a therapy? Thinking as well about you mentioned immunotherapies, because obviously in humans there's a lot of kind of exciting news in that area at the moment, I guess, with things like this thing CAR T cells, essentially where you take a T cell out of an individual, engineer it, essentially stick to it molecules that allow it to then go back in and recognise a particular cancer, which it seems to be very effective in trials. Do you kind of foresee anything like that in the area of Tasmanian devils? Do you think there could be some kind of therapy that would actually be effective? I guess the main problem, as you were saying before, was getting the therapy to the animals.
Well, I think actually there are certainly interesting prospects for harnessing the immune system to fight this devil cancer, particularly as this devil cancer lives in this strange balance of escaping the host's immune defences despite it being derived from the same host species. And we know that there are a small number of cases where devils appear to have mounted an immune response and actually fought off the cancer with their own immune systems. So we know the potential is there for this transmissible cancer to be fought off by the host immune system. So there's real potential, I think, to develop perhaps some kind of immunotherapy, and perhaps these drugs that we have recently found in a screen, they might work well in combination with an immunotherapy. However, as you mentioned, the real challenge here is not actually developing the therapy but delivering it, because this is a wild animal population, which would be very challenging to deliver on a large scale.
Do you think it probably will just be an extinction in this case? You're mentioning that there's a population that's been taken aside, but you said because we don't really understand the process yet enough to say whether the cancer could actually arise in that population as well. So then maybe we would be looking at a kind of total extinction. Is that on the cards, do you think?
Well, it's quite unusual for a single host restricted disease to actually cause extinction, but predictions have been made in the case of the devil cancer because of its frequency dependent transmission, that there is a potential that it could cause whole species extinction. That's why the insurance populations are so important, keeping the devils away from the disease just in case extinction occurs in the wild. But this is an area which is kind of developing a lot at the moment as we're observing these interesting events happening in the wild, like in the case of the small number of animals we've seen actually fight off the disease with their own immune defenses. So I think that it's kind of a ripe moment to start to rethink some of these models and think about what this type of tolerance we might be seeing emerging in the wild might mean for the future evolution of the disease. So I think in terms of conservation, we do have to plan for the worst case scenario, which would be a threat to the entire species, but it will be really interesting to see what future models will tell us.
You've already spoken a little bit about this already, but given that the immune systems seem to be functional in these Tasmanian devils, and you were saying that they reject skin grafts and things. What are your thoughts on kind of speculating as to what's actually a cause behind this cancer? Because obviously you've kind of thrown up a few things, like potentially a kind of lack of diversity might be one of the kind of contributing factors.
Yeah, and this is a very important question, particularly as I mentioned in my talk. We've recently discovered that there's not one but actually 2 transmissible cancers in Tasmanian devils. So this species seems to be particularly vulnerable to giving rise to this type of disease, and we'd really like to understand why that is. And probably an important part of that is the transmission mechanism, that the fact that they bite each other, and that gives a route of transmission. But the other probably important part is the immune system and how Tasmanian devils might be different to other species in that respect. Maybe they are more vulnerable. That could be perhaps related to the fact that as a population they're low in diversity, but I really doubt that's the entire answer to that question, given the fact that they can detect and reject allogeneic skin grafts. So I think there's a lot of really important work to be done in looking at the functioning of the Tasmanian devil's immune system to see if there's anything different about it. But I suppose the possibility does exist that whatever adaptations transmissible cancers in Tasmanian devils have required to escape the immune system, those types of mechanisms might also be able to emerge in other species. Interesting that just in the last 2 years, researchers have discovered an additional 6 transmissible cancers actually, 5 of which occur in various species of marine bivalves, including clams and cockles and mussels. So it seems that at least in some ecological niches, transmissible cancers can be fairly common. There's also a question as to whether transmissible cancers are simply more common than we previously thought, but haven't really been recognised, haven't really been tested. It's a possibility.
Well, thanks very much for speaking to us, Elizabeth. Anywhere the listeners can go to find out more information about this kind of thing? Probably just your website and things.
We have a website.
Yeah.
We're called the Transmissible Cancer Group, TCG. So it's if you Google Transmissible Cancer Group Cambridge, you'll find us there.
Brilliant. That's what they should do. I think one thing the listeners should also do is probably check out the noise Tasmanian devils make, because I hadn't heard that before. It's amazing.
Pretty scary
yeah, it
noise.
is. Yeah,
That's
you
how
can
they got their name.
Yeah, I can understand that. Well, Elizabeth, thanks very much. Absolutely brilliant interview. Thank you very much indeed again to Elizabeth Murchison for coming on the show. This was a while ago now, as this is a highlight show today. Now, I am going to actually show you, just before I've got a request to play for you, I am actually going to show you that noise, the Tasmanian devil growl, because this is something which I think is going to keep you up for many nights now. So I'm sorry, but let's...
We need to hear it.
We do need to hear it, don't we? Shall I give it a play, Steph?
Let's play it.
Yep, that's it. Here's a female. It's a nice noise, isn't it? Here's a baby. Delightful. Steph's looking a bit shocked. What do you think? Do you like that?
Yes. Truly delightful.
They do look.
Like
they do look very cute. This is the
they
strange
do look
thing,
very
and this is
cute, yes.
apparently. I don't know how true this is, but apparently this is how they got their name, the Tasmanian Devil, because basically you can imagine this, right? Imagine not knowing what was making that noise, and you hear this, ungodly racket outside, and you think, okay, that's
What is it?
definitely
Yeah.
the devil. That's what you'd think, right?
I know, yeah.
Automatically you'd
That
think
sound,
that.
just, yeah.
Just imagine hearing that outside your little canvas tent or whatever, and you think, okay, that's the devil, isn't it? Why has the devil come to visit me? And you look outside, and you say, okay, well, there's nothing in sight. I mean, of course, there's this little fluffy little creature. That can't be that, and just don't even get that second glance. Tasmanian devil. There we go. Apparently, that's how they got the name. I don't know if that's just one of those urban legends, as they say. I don't know. Well, I don't know. Okay, coming up next is Dr. Lewis Halsey. Dr. Lewis is from the University of Roehampton, and he is actually talking about something which is going to probably sound a bit strange, and this is parkour. Parkour athletes. Yeah, he used parkour athletes as models of apes, okay, in a kind of controlled environment, like almost like a lab environment, for some of his research on animal movement. This is fantastic. He also, now this is one of my favourite bits actually that we chat about, he also touches on that question I raised at the beginning. Why don't you see any perfect organisms in nature? If we're kind of, allowing, just allowing for natural selection for a second and thinking, okay, so of course this will always operate to maximise fitness. It selects for the fittest organisms, if you like, the fittest survive. So why then don't we just get an organism, a single organism, for instance, that's just good at everything? It's been selected for in such a way that all of its traits are perfect, it's brilliant, and it's just good at everything. This kind of, this imaginary organism actually has a name, a Darwinian demon. Why don't they exist? Why don't we see that in nature? There must be something stopping that kind of, that sort of evolution, that kind of perfection. Well, here we go. Here's some answers to that question. I believe we also have actually got Sasha and Dave, the profs, the great minds that are Sasha and Dave. I think we've got them to discuss this before in the past as well. So I mean, we could always delve into that a bit as well. But for now, I am going to leave you with Dr. Lewis Halsey in the very capable hands of Dr. Lewis Halsey from Roehampton. Enjoy.
Hi Ben, thank you very much. Lovely to be here. My name's Dr. Lewis Halsey. I'm a reader at the University of Roehampton in London, and I study comparative physiology. So in essence, I look at different animals that live in different environments and have different setups, different physiologies, different morphologies, and I compare them to understand more about how they're adapted specifically for the habitats in which they live.
A lot of your work to do with kind of whole organisms and their ecology has a focus on energy.
Energetics is a central strut running through my work, as you pick up on. Energy expenditure for animals is really fundamental to them, okay? Unlike, a lot of human beings anyway, they can't go down to Tesco's or Asda or something and get some food when they need it. They've got to work hard for it all the time. And so they've got a finite amount of energy, so they need to spend it judiciously, right? If they're using it for one activity, they haven't got it for something else. If they spend a lot of time running around looking for food, well, that's great, but that's less energy to put into eggs or, large offspring or whatever it is. So they've got to be careful with it, and so this is fundamental to all animals. Doesn't matter big, small, watery animals, terrestrial animals, in the air. Energy expenditure is, at least arguably anyway, fundamental to them. So this is something that is central to my work when I'm comparing these different species. However, it's really hard to measure, particularly when you're outside of the lab. It's not how do you measure energy expenditure outside the lab? Well, in the lab we can measure oxygen consumption, right, which is basically energy expenditure by another name, put simply. That's hard enough as it is. Outside the lab we can't measure oxygen consumption. In the lab you'd do it, you'd put a mask on the animal, okay, and you'd capture its breath. Can't really put a mask on an animal outside, so you've got to measure something else that relates to oxygen consumption. So what we tend to do is put small data logging devices on animals that measure something that relates to energy expenditure, something that correlates with energy expenditure. That could be heart rate, or a common one these days is accelerometry. So in other words, the movement, the amount of movement of the animal's body. And it kind of makes intuitive sense. The more you're moving, this is inclusive of humans, the more you're moving, the harder you're working, the more energy you're using. So if we can measure the amount of movement of an animal's body in the wild, if we've managed to calibrate that in the lab, then we can estimate their energy expenditure in that way. It's quite a complicated and involved procedure, but it gets us an answer in the end.
Sure. It's interesting because I guess it's at its very core, it's kind of a very simple and very strong kind of idea that ultimately energy is kind of key pretty much everywhere you look in biology. So you've got the metabolic theory of ecology, of course, which essentially states that so many different rates and so many different traits of animals can ultimately be fed back into what's going on at the level of the energy, essentially, and the kind of workings of the enzymes. But interesting that you were saying about it's just difficult to measure, though, in a lot of scenarios. one thing which I found really cool actually when I was having a little look at the kind of stuff that you've been involved with in the past was when you took parkour athletes as a model for apes, essentially moving in the habitats, almost quite entertaining. But it's because you can't just go into the wild, can you, and strap things that can measure energy on apes.
No, that's spot on. So that's a really good example. Take orangutans, which are perhaps the archetypal tree-dwelling ape, right? They live up in the trees. These trees bend. They're flexible. So they have the potential to sap the energy from these orangutans as they're moving around in the trees. And of course it's a 3D environment, so sometimes these orangutans are having to move up through the trees. And they make it look easy, but it takes a lot of energy to do that. You imagine trying to climb a rope, right? It's hard if it's possible at all. And then the food they've got up there, these fruits are quite low energy, the low energy density. And then these orangutans are big. I mean, they're not like a squirrel, right? They're big animals. They're basically the size of human beings. You're thinking, well, that doesn't seem a very clever adaptation to being a tree-dwelling ape with low-grade fruits to eat. Why are you big? Okay, so we started to look at this. Now, the problem is, we can go into the field. First of all, it takes days to even find an orangutan. You've got to see that. To even observe one is hard, right? And then you've got to capture it, which is ethically unsound. Even if you did capture it, then you put a data logger on it, like I was saying earlier, to measure something, its body movement. Well, all the orangutan's going to do is take the data logger off and break the data logger. It's going to break the data logger. So we said, well, okay, we're not even going to try. Okay, somebody should try, okay, but it's not going to be me. Life's too short. So we asked parkour athletes, street gymnasts, whatever you want to call them. We said, will you mimic, as best you can, orangutans in the lab? So we got them into the lab. The lab was a gym, a massive, like a gymnasium where gymnasts would do their stuff. And we got them doing various activities which somewhat simulate movement in an arboreal forest. And we asked them to make the sort of movements, swinging from the hands and this sort of thing that orangutans do. Now, they can't perfectly simulate an orangutan, okay? They can't do it. Even parkour athletes can't be orangutans. They'd like to be, but they're not. But they get quite close. So it gives us an opportunity to get some insights in how these orangutans can survive. In other words, spend little enough energy in that very tricky three-dimensional environment that they can survive and reproduce and be a successful species by looking at these parkour athletes in the lab. And then in the lab, the great thing with an athlete is you can ask him or her to do something and they will do it. Unlike an animal where you've got to train them, they'll do it. And the parkour athlete, you can put the oxygen mask on, you can get the data. So actually that became a tractable, viable way to look at orangutans. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go to Borneo. That's the one downside.
Yeah, but at least you saved the data loggers. They didn't get destroyed, right? Well, hopefully they didn't.
Not too many of them. One or two, actually, amazingly. But
another project which I think sounds really awesome, a paper you put out recently about it, the question, do animals have to exercise to keep fit? Because, again, on the kind of energy theme, this is something which you might not really think about.
So this is a paper that I wrote not too long ago, but to be clear, it's got no empirical data in it. It's just posing a question. It's just saying, hang on a minute, human beings we go to the gym or we go for a run or we cycle to work or whatever it is to keep as fit as we'd like to, or at least try to. Do any animals have to do this? Now, no one's really asked the question or look into it. I think intuitively people would feel that animals in the wild, it's a tough life, so they're working hard in their everyday activities anyway, and that keeps them fit, right? So they're fit. Well, that may be true. I think that probably is true for a lot of animals. But imagine you've got an animal that plods around very slowly during the day. It grazes on grass or something, right? Grazes on grass. So it's just very, very slowly moving a little bit, standing still, just eating, just very low-grade stuff. But every now and then it gets attacked by a predator. And it's got to run fast. And it might have to run fast up a hill, and it might have to run fast for quite a while, I don't know. So how does it maintain the fitness to do this? Because as a human being, if you're doing very little exercise day on day and you suddenly got to run a few hundred metres up a hill, you basically can't do it. And people often don't realise how unfit we are until we've got to do it. And of course, you only realise how unfit you are once if you're being run down by a predator.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so are there any animals out there, right, that are saying, well, effectively saying, crikey, I'm not as fit as I want to be able to outrun that predator or compete with conspecifics, compete with other animals of my own type for mates or whatever it is. I'm not fit enough by just plodding around day on day. So maybe they run around a bit or do some sort of exercise that we wouldn't notice as being exercise. They just seem to be running around. Are they? And then if they are, what are the implications? Again, there's an energetics issue. Doing running around to keep fit costs energy and time that they're therefore not using other things. Also, maintaining more musculature or a stronger heart or more vascularization of their body, so they can pump more blood around. Because they are fitter, maintaining that costs more energy. So then there comes again this energy issue for them. Well, they might think, well, I mean, subconscious, right? But they might think, well, I want to be fit, but actually there's an energy trade-off for doing that. There's no point in spending too much time getting too fit because I'm burning a load of energy for this. So I just raised that question, just thought about different species. There are some animals which, so for example, hibernating polar bears. Okay, they spend months underground, eat nothing, right, and all they're surviving on is their own body. So they're losing weight. Okay, they're fasting. But when they come above ground, they've got to eat. They're hungry. Well, again, they can't go to Tesco's. They've got to fight seals or walruses or narwhals, right, and kill them. So they can't lose that much physical fitness. Otherwise, they're just never going to eat again. And actually, measurements of key muscles in polar bears demonstrate that although they do lose body mass, they don't lose mass from those key muscles, which presumably maintains their strength so that when they appear out of hibernation, they're physically capable to forage. Other species, for example, there are animals that migrate a very long way once a year or twice a year. How are they suddenly able to do this? Birds that fly, we know flying is energetically costly, and yet they seem to do no physical exercise before migrating. They don't do any practicing before they run their marathon or their equivalent of the marathon. It seems like there are just hormonal changes in animals that suddenly mean they start to get buff. They start to get big muscles. They're not going to the gym, but there's just an endogenous, as we would call it, an internal to the animal, some trigger that gets, I'd love to have that myself. I'd love to just turn it on, ready for the beach holiday, right? I'm going to have a beach holiday in a few weeks' time. I think I'll just, we can't do that. Absolutely. So then finally, the question is, well, why is it that animals such as human beings don't have that capacity? Why is it that we don't just turn on fitness when we want to? And why is it that some animals do? Can we explain that by their ecology, by the type of lifestyle they live? Nobody knows the answer to this. So there's some interesting things to delve into, and I was just raising this question and hoping that some people out there will be able to look into it.
Listeners as well, I definitely urge you to go read that paper. It's nice and short as well.
Nice and short, yes. That's the best thing about
it. Yeah, it's awesome. You touched on there about this whole kind of trade-off thing, and this is kind of what I wanted to return to, and I spoke at the beginning about this energy theme, which is clearly running throughout a lot of your work, because of course that is a very general thing, isn't it? We use trade-offs in biology, energetic trade-offs, to actually explain a multitude of traits, even number of eggs and things like that. Because of course, if you use energy for one thing, you don't have it for another. As simple as that.
Yeah.
Could you kind of talk us through that a little bit?
Okay, so let's put it in a different way. So I was watching, what was it? The film Alien, right, on the television. Okay, so for those who don't know the film Alien, and there's a bunch of these films, right, you get these alien beings which are very, very nasty and kill humans, right, and they're incredibly powerful, and they basically, you get a parasite that hatches out of an egg, and then it attaches to the human being, lays an egg in the human being, it bursts out the human being, and as a smallish thing, maybe 6 inches in length, and then very, very rapidly it grows into something many times larger than the human being, and it's incredibly robust. And, well, I'm not saying these things can't exist somewhere in the universe, but it seems highly unlikely for the following simple reason. The amount of energy that this animal would need to accumulate in order to grow at the rate it's growing is just off the scale. It's just inconceivable, okay? So in these films, and obviously sure, the films are for fun, right? But it makes the point that there's just finite amount of energy available. So you're putting a huge amount of energy into growing very, very quickly. You're not going to be building your body of very high quality materials. Certainly not the sort of materials that these alien animals were, which were extremely robust and could deal with very low temperatures and very high temperatures and all this thing. It just doesn't make any sense. They are not taking in and assimilating in energy at anywhere near the rate they would need to produce themselves. Okay, and that's why lions are big but not ridiculously big, okay, or whatever. And this is why actually, in part, why a lot of very large animals died out, because it's all very well being the biggest animal out there, right, and you're defended for other animals from your size, you can attack other animals because of your greater size, but boy do you need to eat a lot to do it, particularly if you're an endotherm, particularly if you're a warm-blooded animal, because you're stoking a fire inside you to keep yourself warm, and that costs a lot of energy, as everyone knows who pays a gas bill for their home. So energy is really finite, so it's all very well, you put it into having big claws or big muscles or just big size per se or lots of eggs. You do that, you're not doing something else. So there's a major trade-off for animals. It is not obvious that to have a big this or a big that or a refined that is a good thing, because you're spending it on that. You do not have that energy for something else. And we need to bear that in mind. Human beings, as long as we can afford it, we enjoy generally having, say, 3 hearty meals a day. Something like that. That's great. That's an enormous amount of food. Okay, given that most of us spend most of the time sitting there, not doing a lot. You watch people on a long-haul plane flight, okay, and they get a meal when they get on the plane. 4 or 5 hours later, having sat there watching films, they get another meal. 4 or 5 hours later, just before the plane lands, they get another meal. You think, well, no one's done anything, right? All they've done is get up to go to the loo, okay? You take something like an alligator, for example, similar sized animal, 70, 80, 90 kilos, whatever. Because they're ectothermic, because they don't try and maintain a certain body temperature that's actually quite high, as humans do, but they don't. They use far less energy. Estimates of something like 10% the amount. Maybe it's more like 20%. But they can survive on hundreds of calories, just hundreds of calories a day, whereas a fully grown adult male human's probably 2,500. So there's an example of we put a lot of our energy, for example, into maintaining warmth in our body, which gives us advantages. We can run around in all sorts of temperatures, which gives us advantages of access to food and so forth. But we pay a massive price for it by the amount of food we have to eat. Again, if you're living in a Western society, as long as you're not at the bottom end of the demographic, as it were, you can afford to do that, and it's actually quite enjoyable. But you imagine having that food from the shop taken away, and you've got to go out and forage, like on Bear Grylls Island. I mean, they're all losing weight incredibly rapidly on Bear Grylls the Island, going back to TV shows. Because it's incredible, and they go. Sorry, I'm going on about it, but they go out there and they capture 1 fish for 10, right? You think, well, this is when they're all dead excited about it. You're thinking, really, that fish has probably got 5,000 calories in it, right? So it's a big fish, but that's 500 calories per person. That's what someone's eating for one breakfast. And the weight is just dropping off these people. So it's a really big issue for wild animals' energy. So you put it into one thing, you haven't got it for something else. And key, ultimately, whatever these animals are, whether they're aliens from the television or cows plodding around in the field, ultimately they're trying to reproduce. If you put too much energy into yourself and being wonderful yourself, you've got too little energy for your offspring. So you don't pass your genes on for the next generation. So evolutionarily, you might as well not have bothered at all.
Oh, I loved the example of the alien, actually. We've actually almost got a term for that in biology, haven't we? A Darwinian demon, essentially a perfect organism. Why don't they exist? Because of these trade-offs. Naively, you might think, oh, well, why don't you just have something which is just good at everything? But this is the reason, right? Because you have these trade-offs.
Yeah, and you see that beautifully in the animal kingdom, in the true animal kingdom that's around us, and not in the films, which are great. But you see these trade-offs. You see that there is nothing that's ultimate. However, you do see that some animals are doing far better than others in terms of a number of offspring. I mean, obviously, being small is the simplest way to achieve this. Smaller animals tend to have a lot of offspring. Perhaps they don't survive, so that's an issue. But certainly, some animals are doing a lot better than others. It's not necessarily because they've got big claws, however.
So that is Dr. Lewis Housey. The full interview is available on Catch Up. There is a part 2 to that interview, which I do urge you to take a little listen to if you like that. You can find it all on the Catch Up. Indeed, as with all of these interviews, actually, there are other parts to these, so you can catch them all if you like, and much more as well on the Catch Up if you wish to. I'm going to now play a little song, actually. Now, Stephanie requested Fast Car, so I'm going to play this version of this. This is a Passenger version, which I heard did actually, a cover by Passenger. Is this right, Steph? Do you think this is? Yeah.
Let's play it.
All right, let's give this a spin.
You've got a fast car, I want a ticket for anywhere. Maybe we can make a deal. Maybe together we can get somewhere. Any place is better. Starting from nothing, we got nothing to lose. Maybe we'll make something. Me, myself, I got nothing to prove. Got a fast car, I got a plan to get us out of here. Working at a convenience store, managed to save just a little bit of money. We don't have to drive too far, just cross the border and into the city. You and I can both get jobs, finally see what it means to be living. I remember when we were driving in your car. Speed so fast, it felt like I was drunk. City lights lay out before us, and your arm felt nice round my shoulder. And I had a feeling that I belonged, and I had a feeling I could be someone, be someone, be someone. See, my old man's got a problem. He lives with a bottle, that's the way it is. Said his body's too old for working. His body's too young to look like his. Mama went off and left him. Said she wanted more than he could give. He said someone's gotta take care of him. I quit school, that's what I did. I remember when we were driving in your car. Speed so fast, it felt like I was drunk. City lights lay out before us, and your arm felt nice round my shoulder. And I had a feeling that I belonged, and I had a feeling I could be someone. Driving in your car, speed so fast, it felt like I was drunk. City lights lay out before us, and it all felt nice round my shoulder. And I had a feeling that I belonged. I had a feeling I could be someone. I had a feeling that I belonged. I had a feeling I could be someone. Be someone, be someone.
Well, that is part 2 of our highlight special. Nearly wrapped up now. We are going to have to love you and leave you very shortly. Got time for one more interview, actually. I'm going to play this one with Amanda Holden. She's talking about furniture today.
Ooh,
furniture, but
furniture.
you know, it doesn't matter, does it? Because it's Amanda Holden. So if you're thinking furniture, oh, what? No, don't worry, it's Amanda Holden. I didn't know this actually about Amanda Holden. Obviously, she's quite the celeb, but I don't think many people know that she actually has her own furniture and interior design range. Did you know that? No?
No,
I
didn't know.
Well, you do now.
I do now.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get this on, and then if you do stay tuned though, there are many more shows coming up today on The Source. Of course, I will give you a lowdown on what you can expect later in the day, and some other shows as well that you could check out just before we close up. But for now, I'm going to leave you with Amanda Holden, and then we'll probably squeeze in a couple more tunes as well. What do you think, Steph? Just a couple. Yeah. Might as well. Anyway, for now, here's Amanda.
Hello, it's Amanda Holden here.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Amanda. Very warm welcome to you. You need to slow down, Amanda, because, you know, this is making everybody else look bad, right? Because not only are you a very well-known actress and, of course, judge on Britain's Got Talent, but also your interior range, and you're dropping a new collection for spring and summer, which is looking fantastic. I must say, my personal favourite out of what you're dropping now is the wooden cocktail chest. That looks fantastic.
Oh, good. This seems to be a favourite with the boys. I'm loving this. Yeah, that whole concept came from me wanting to take like a portable cocktail sort of carrier on, you know, to the school pickup. Obviously, we walk. And, you know, just be able to have a cocktail rather than just a glass of wine if you went on a picnic. And it turned into a piece of furniture instead, which is phenomenal. I've got one in my house, but you're right, you can store glasses in it, booze in it, obviously. There are little drawers for snacks and your corkscrew, and it just looks like an innocent bit of furniture tucked in the corner till you open the door.
Yeah, hiding the secret. I like the way it's got a little blackboard as well, so you can write on the little cocktail.
You can write Mandy's Mojitos.
Yeah.
Which is always what I have.
The big question is then, I mean, this does beg a very important question. That is, what would your ideal cocktail be that you could keep in there to serve up?
It would actually, I love a frozen margarita.
Oh, okay.
So,
Nice.
that's the thing. It has to have a lot of salt round the rim. That's my favourite.
Nice.
Because I like Tang Fastics. It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, there's a great cocktail bar, actually. We're based in Falmouth, and they always serve loads of sweets in the cocktails. It's great. Absolutely fantastic.
Oh, lovely.
Well,
how lovely.
I mean, I was looking at, so some of the items in the range, Amanda, and actually some of them kind of quite reminiscent of, look like they've been inspired by nature. So you've got the cactus-style side table, which is awesome, and even a pillow that's sort of reminiscent of zebra stripes. And I was actually wondering if, nature's always something that's kind of inspired you. I'm thinking as well about, of course, your role in Wild at Heart, which I'm sure a lot of people are
I'm
familiar
loving
with,
all
of
these
course.
links. I'm loving them. Well, I often say that Mother Nature inspires me for colour schemes because I think she puts together colours that you'd never dream of putting together. She's not safe, and I'm definitely not safe. And so there's a lot of bold accents. So you're right. When you look at the cushions, we've got red, we've got seaside blue and yellow, and then we have a lot of sort of mixtures of metals and woods, which is very on trend and very retro at the moment. I think the thing that's doing very well are the storage trunks, which featured quite highly on Saturday Night Takeaway the other week when I was got by Ant and Dec. But the storage trunks have come in the most incredible colours so far, and I think will be a mainstay of the bundle berry collection on QVC for the foreseeable future. We've had emerald green and sort of Evertonian blues and blacks, and this season, because of spring and the seasonal changes, we've gone for beautiful sort of pale nudie pinks and greys and white, and Air Force blue, which is a particular favourite shade of blue for me. So, yeah, I suppose I'm inspired seasonally by nature in the way that I think, we've come out of winter and gone into spring.
Yes.
And geometric patterns. I know where you're going with the sort of rugs and the cushion. There's black and white, and it is sort of like more reminiscent of 70s and sort of Scandinavian design. So there's a lot of sort of very clean lines, lots of sort of diagonals, triangles, hexagons.
Yes.
I've always thought they were an amazing, quite a neutral pattern. And the whole range has that featured in some way, somewhere on it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the storage, and actually, I think you found, the QVC did a survey, didn't they? And they found that one of the main things that people are interested in at the moment is more space, more storage and things. But they also found, actually, that it looks like a lot of people actually really struggle with the inspiration side to things. So I wonder if you could kind of, give some advice there for people.
I think what it is it's again, once you've decorated your house, you think that's it. But I think as time goes on and you sort of sit in your lounge and you think, gosh, I've lived now with this. It happened to me the other day. I finished watching a box set and I sat with my husband going, I need to change this lounge. I've changed both my children's bedrooms round at the weekend. I think that every time the sort of weather changes, you want to change something. And I think the beauty of Bundleberry is that even if you just buy a throw or a cushion or a candle lantern or a little nest of tables or a trunk, you can change the way that the room looks, whichever room you choose to put those objects in. You can change the look. You can move furniture around. You can pin back your net curtains to let more light in. There are so many, a throw can change a sofa, a cushion can change a sofa. Yes. I put extra cushions on my sofa the other day because I was tired of it all just being very blue.
Yes.
So I've added sort of mustard greys and yellows, and I even threw a fuchsia pink in the mix, which looked incredible. My husband's not so keen, but I love it. So yeah, and I think the other thing is I wanted it to be affordable for people. I don't want people.
Yes.
It's an expensive thing doing up your house, and you can't afford to make mistakes. And I think that being able to buy the odd piece, the odd throw, the odd candle, it can change your room, and it's also an inexpensive way of changing the look. So.
Yes.
And everything at Bundleberry is also very classic, so it's not going to sort of go out of fashion in a couple of years. So it's money well spent.
Yeah, and it sounds actually like, from what you're saying here, it actually sounds, fairly straightforward. If someone wants to kind of even just transform the whole look of a room, you don't have to be spending, mad cash to do that. You can just get, as you're saying, some of these items and just redecorate in that way. I think probably when people think about, hear the term kind of redecorating, they probably panic a little bit and think,
it doesn't necessarily mean wallpaper and paint colours. It can just be changing your room round and adding something different to it or taking something away from it. I'm all about no clutter and clean lines and not too many ornaments and sort of picture frames being the same size, and
Yes.
I've even thought this week that I'm going to make all the photographs in my house black and white now, so that they look kind of uniform.
There we go. Yeah. Excellent idea. Well, Amanda, I'm conscious of time, so I won't keep you for much longer at all.
Thank you. It's lovely to talk to you. My love to sunny, soon to be sunny Cornwall.
It will be, yes. Song choice for you, just before you go, Amanda, at all?
Yes.
Have you got any favourite songs at all that I could play for you today?
Oh, gosh, somebody else just asked me this, so I'm not going to say the same thing. I think, can you play George Ezra's new one?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I heard it on
Fantastic
Radio
choice.
1 the other day. I can't remember the thing of it, but I love George Ezra.
Yeah.
I'd
well,
mix
brilliant.
him and Rag and Bone Man up, but, they both sound the same, really. They're brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. One of them. We'll get one of them on.
One of them would be brilliant.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Have
Thanks,
a great
darling.
day. Thanks, bye.
Bye.
We will finish up with some George Ezra, of course. It's only fair, isn't it? But for now, that is the end. That we have wrapped up the part 2 of the highlights special for your Thursday morning breakfast show here on The Source. If you want to stay tuned to Source, please do. Up next is Steve presenting the Morning Break show. We also have Steve Foster on the radio after that. Kyle's Rockin' Radio show. We've got Chat and Music Underground and Inside Local Music with Simon Neild from 5, the programme that keeps you up to date with the local music scene. And we also have programmes running through the evening. So do check the schedule. And do stay tuned with us here on Source. And that is us done, Steph. It's a shame, isn't it? I don't like it when it comes to the end, do you?
No, I don't. I wish I could go on.
Yeah, well, should we say goodbye? Do you want to go first?
Okay, goodbye.
Yeah, is that you done?
That's me done.
Nothing
Have
else
a
to
lovely
add?
day.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you to all of our special guests indeed as well today. You heard from Professor Michael Sweet, Dr. Elizabeth Murchison, Professor Alex Massoudi and Dr. Lewis Halsey. Now, this was very tough to choose highlights, of course. I mean, I am I'm honoured to have all of the special guests who join us every week. So thank you to all of our guests, and thank you very much indeed, in particular to you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for tuning into The Source this morning, and I hope you have an absolutely fabulous rest of the day, a great day tomorrow, and most importantly, a brilliant weekend. That is it from us.